the final week of this year's 60-day legislative session. Many bills have already failed, but a few still have some time to make it through both houses and onto the governor's desk. This week for the People, Power, and Democracy Project, correspondent Gwyneth Dolan went to the Roundhouse to learn more about a bill that passed the Senate but was called back by the sponsor. This legislation raises important questions about ethics oversight and the information lawmakers need to make decisions about the many pieces of legislation they consider each year.
Andrew, this week you've been reporting on a kerfuffle up here at the Roundhouse. There's been a lot of controversy over a lease deal. What is this story about?
So it really has to do with when the Children, Youth and Families Department first takes children into custody to go into foster care in Albuquerque. One of the first places they might land is at a 10-story office building on San Mateo. And for a couple of years now, the department has been saying that this building is really not set up to handle a stream of children, sometimes more than 80 a month. They'd like a better facility, but previous efforts to get a different facility, whether to buy one or lease one, haven't worked out. And now the department has said that the best option is just to extend the lease beyond what they can do ordinarily under the state rules. And Senator Stephen Neville brought legislation that would allow them to carve out one section of the state rule for procurement and let the department extend its lease for at least another 7 years and then up to 10 years beyond that too.
But let me ask you this. If this is an office building that is inappropriate for taking in children, why would extending the lease be a good idea?
So the department has said that the landlord was offering to undertake upgrades across the facility as well as build a new 20,000 square foot center on the same site if they could extend their lease. And so they said that with overall costs of the state remaining flat or maybe even dropping, that it would be a good deal.
So what's so strange about that?
Well, it's really unusual to see a bill that creates an exception to the state rules for procurement for just one real estate deal. In fact, a lot of legislators were asking about that. Why do we need a bill to do this when the department, if it's really an emergency, could waive this rule? It could find other options. Why make a whole piece of legislation and ask the Senate and House representatives to vote on it?
And there were issues about campaign donations, right?
That's right. It came up in committee. There were senators who asked expressly, who were the owners? What connections did they have to people in state government? The bill's sponsor, Senator Stephen Neville, said that these were people who hadn't made any significant campaign contributions. They didn't have any big connections to people in government. It turned out later that they did. They'd given more than $26,000 combined to the governor and her political action committee, and that directly contradicted what Neville said on the floor of the Senate. So when this was brought to his attention, he went to the Senate and told everybody that he had misled them, that he had given them inaccurate information, and he asked to withdraw his own bill to kill it. He said he didn't want to be pushing something that he had misled people on.
So the question here really is, was this an innocent mistake or was there some effort to pull a fast one?
I think that's a great question, and that's something that a lot of senators are asking. I think there are also a lot of questions too, though, still about why this was even a bill and how much did the contributors stand to benefit from this, how much contact have they had with state officials, whether it be people in the governor's office or the General Services Department or the Children, Youth and Families Department about this bill.
You reported that Governor Martinez approached Senator Peter Wirth, he's the new majority leader here, and he had opposed this lease deal. She encouraged him to change his mind. That's a little unusual.
That's exactly what a lot of senators said, or at least a few. There were 10 who voted against this the first time around, who said that it just seemed fishy. It seemed like a sweetheart deal was another term that was used a lot. And I think that there are still a lot of questions out there about why this was a bill in the first place, whether this deal would really be good for the taxpayers, and really who stood to benefit.
And it looks fishy.
Yeah, I think it depends who you ask. I mean, there are senators who would say that that certainly seems unusual. It was unusual for the governor to take this kind of an interest in a bill like this. At the same time, Senator Wirth is the majority leader. He was, at a meeting, and so I think there are a lot of questions still about what was the governor's interest in this. Why was this particular project of interest to her? Her office says it's because CYFD has needed a new space, that she's been concerned about the problems that they're running into just being able to accommodate the children that they have.
Senator, this week we're talking about this lease bill for the CYFD building. You carried the bill. What happened here?
Well, I was approached to do some kind of legislation to help CYFD extend a lease on a current facility that they're renting. The legislation was, I requested that the legislation be drafted. I discussed it with the parties involved, the Secretary of General Services, Ed Burkle, Monique Jacobson, who's Secretary of CYFD. They have been trying for a couple of 3 years to try facilities to where they can house the kids that they take in on, for foster care and so forth. They have tried a number of things. They tried to purchase something that fell through. It was some bad press. They got a process going to do some requests for proposals. They did the RFPs. Those came in basically doubling their rent. The current landowners came to them and said, we can do something with the current facilities if you'll renew your lease at the current rate, current price, and we'll add, an additional 20,000 square feet. So that's the parameters that I was given whenever they asked me to carry the legislation. So in hindsight, it still seems like a reasonably good deal because we're not increasing the budget. We're paying the same dollar amount. We're getting more space, and we're getting the building remodeled, upgraded, and all of the things that were necessary to try to do a better job of dealing with the kids were going to be accomplished, and that was the goal that Secretary Jacobson wanted to accomplish.
So the problem arose then when the Secretary of the General Services Department told lawmakers there were no political connections here, no political contributions. How did that happen?
Well, the first thing I asked the secretaries was confirm that if there are any political involvements, we have those up front. Certainly, I don't have time to go search records, and I didn't even know who the parties were. But they went and they did a search through the Secretary of State's site, and they determined that in their mind they didn't see anything that was a concern or an issue. They were all minor donations to smaller candidates, lesser candidates than the governor. Turns out it was an error. I started to get feedback about late last week, and some folks said you better double check that. I immediately contacted Secretary Jacobson, who called me back and confirmed, yes, there were some donations made to the governor. So I immediately made arrangements to jerk the bill.
These contributions are inherently political. So people on both sides of the aisle are going to want to know, was this just a screw up? Was it just incompetence? Or was this malfeasance? Were they trying to, push this through without talking about it?
I think there was an error made. I don't think there was any intent by Secretary Burkle or his staff or whoever did the actual search to deceive the public. I think they just missed it. They didn't do it correctly. It's relatively simple, I understand, to do this, but I didn't do it myself. And so whoever did actually do the search missed a button that they didn't hit. They didn't get the out-of-state donors. That's what I understand the problem was.
So there is still a question here of the governor's involvement. The donations were made to her. She's been very involved in this decision. Should people be worried that money influenced the executive branch's decision to pursue this?
Well, in this case, I don't think so, but this is a long-standing lease. These buildings had been leased for something like almost 20 years, which was the root of the problem. They had been occupying these facilities for 20 years. There had been changes in ownership through that time, but the current lease was going to be extended at the current rate, so there was not any, and actually some additional square footage was to be constructed, so there were not any great benefits to anybody that were going to come about to renew this lease.
This was painful and embarrassing for you.
It certainly was.
Is there anything you think we could do to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again?
Well, it's a matter of due diligence. We need to make sure that we get all the research. I carry agency bills every year. I get sheriff's departments, I get RFD, RLD, I'm sorry, and various agencies have asked me from time to time to carry legislation. You rely totally on those people to do the right thing. There's no way in a 30 or 60-day session that legislators can do the research that has to be done to make sure every single rock is turned over, and you do that. You have to rely on the people. We carry them for people who are not agencies, and we rely on those people to bring us the facts. I don't think there was anything nefarious about this, but it certainly was an error that it cost us possibly the lease, and it probably, the big losers here are going to be the kids. That's the real bottom line on this, is somehow or another, but they're going to be delayed at least a minimum of a couple of years to try to resolve this in some form or fashion.
Heather Ferguson, there is an ethics commission bill that you are supporting that's on its way to the floor right now. If that ethics commission were already in place today and someone made a complaint about this lease bill saying there had been something pay to play, say, in there, what would that process look like?
What the Ethics Commission would be able to do is they can initiate, investigate, and adjudicate cases that are brought to them. So as a complaint would be filed with the Ethics Commission, they would be able to review it, determine whether or not there's any merit to it, and if there's clear and convincing evidence, which is a good legal standard to have, then they would be able to move forward with an investigation that would be public and transparent.
So they could say, you know, we've looked into this and it appears to be an honest mistake. Or they could say, actually it looks like there may be some wrongdoing here and we're going to proceed with that.
Absolutely. I mean, what we did is we made sure that we put language in there to address frivolous complaints. And so ones that could not be substantiated would not be investigated, but they would be made public. And so that would be something that will be addressed in some of the enabling legislation at this point. But with a case that would have merit, they would move forward with the investigatory process. They would notify the individual that had had a complaint filed against them, and then be able to carry through that process and have a hearing.
But this ethics commission thing, this isn't the only thing you're working on. You've got some other ethics related proposals that you're working on. Where are they?
Well, we had Senate Bill 96 sponsored by Senator Peter Wirth, and that is something that we have been working on for 7 years. It is a campaign finance disclosure bill. And what that will allow is more transparency to all of our candidate reports, our PAC reports. It defines an independent expenditure, which is something that we have been long overdue with not having that definition in our statute. And most importantly, after Citizens United in 2010, there's a tremendous amount of unconstitutional language currently in our statute, and this fixes that.
You also have a proposal that would limit the ability of lawmakers to leave office one day and start lobbying their colleagues the next.
Yes. So that was a cooling off period that we asked that legislators, once they left office, either by choice or by vote, would have to take a cooling off period of now what would be 1 year before they lobby the legislative body in which they served.
These three bills, Ethics Commission, Campaign Finance Disclosure, and Revolving Door, these are things we've been following for years. I mean, I've been up here how long, and I have never seen them as close as they are now to fruition.
Oh, they have already made history this session. I mean, getting the disclosure bill to the House floor the other day is something that has never happened. It has passed the Senate unanimously 4 times before, but we always ran out of time when it hit the House. And so getting that through, getting an ethics commission as a constitutional amendment out of the Rules Committee has never been done before, and we've been working on this for over 38 years.
And why is that?
What changed with that is really that we had a change of leadership. Senator Peter Wirth has come in. He has always been such a strong proponent of good government. He came in and he's been the one that's been carrying the campaign finance bills. And I'll be honest, our statute on campaign finance is complex, and it takes a tremendous amount of legal knowledge to be able to navigate that statutory changes.
So if all three of these things pass, how will things be different in this building in the future?
I think what you're seeing right now is a tremendous amount of confidence from the legislative body in both chambers, who are comfortable letting the sunlight come into this building, letting the public see what's going on. They see that the public trust has been eroded so much over time, and it's time to rebuild that trust. So I think that we're going to see a whole lot of light.